I've buried men I respected and men I didn't, and I've never once been able to tell you which graves I dug straighter. That's the thing nobody warns you about getting old out here. Your hands stop asking your conscience for permission. But there was one debt I watched get paid that I still turn over in my mind on the long nights, the kind of debt that was written in one man's name and collected in his daughter's blood and bone. If you've ever watched somebody smaller than the whole world decide they weren't going to run from it, stay with me. This one earns the sitting. The morning it started, I was fixing a gate that didn't need fixing. That's what a man does when he's avoiding something. I'd been avoiding the letter in my coat pocket for 3 days, the one from the bank in Canyon Creek, and so I stood there in the gray light working a hinge that turned fine, telling myself the wood had swelled. My name's Elias Ward. I ran cattle then on a stretch of ground the territory hadn't figured out how to tax yet, 40 miles from anything you could call a town, and close enough to the Apache country that I'd learned to read the ridgelines the way other men read scripture. I keep a log, always have. Little leather thing I bought off a peddler in '71, and I write in it most nights, weather calving who came by. My wife, before the fever took her, used to say I'd rather write a thing down than feel it. She wasn't wrong. So understand that what I'm telling you now, I've had years to feel, because I wrote it down first and did my feeling after. The girl came up the wash on a mule that was worth more than she was dressed to look. I saw her before she saw me. That's the ridgeline habit. She rode loose but watchful, one hand on the reins and one resting near her thigh where I'd have put a hand if I wanted a pistol close and didn't want to say so. Young. 19, maybe 20. Dark hair pinned up under a man's hat and a jaw set like a fence post. When she got close enough, I saw her eyes were red-rimmed but dry, and I've learned that's a worse sign than crying. Crying means the grief still has somewhere to go. You Ward, she said. Depends who's collecting. Nobody's collecting from you. She swung down off the mule easy, and I noticed she favored her left side coming down, a stiffness she was working hard to hide. You knew my father, Tom Cutter. The name landed in me like a stone down a well. I waited to hear the splash. I knew a Tom Cutter, I said carefully. Ran freight out of Canyon Creek, owed money to the wrong men and paid some of it with his knuckles. That's him. Something flickered across her face, not quite a smile. He's dead 3 weeks now. I took my hat off. It's a small thing, but it's the only thing you have to give sometimes. I'm sorry to hear it. Don't be. She said it flat, but her hand had found the mule's neck and was working small circles in the hide, the way you gentle an animal, or the way you gentle yourself. He died owing $1,100 to Silas Fenn, and Fenn's men came to the house to explain that when a man dies owing, the debt doesn't die with him. It just changes hands. I understood then why she'd favored her side. They put it on you, I said. They put it on the family. My mother's got the consumption, my brother's 9. She looked at me steady. There's nobody in this family but me who can lift the thing, so they put it on me. I want to tell you I offered her coffee and a kind word and sent her on her way. That's what a sensible man does. I had cattle and a bad knee and no cause in the world to step into $1,100 of another man's trouble. But I'd known Tom Cutter, and I'd known what Silas Fenn was, and there are moments when the shape of your own life gets decided by how long you stand quiet. Why come to me? I asked. She reached into her coat, slow, so I'd see there was nothing in her hand but paper, and held out a folded page gone soft at the creases from being read too many times. Because your name's in his ledger, she said, as the man he trusted to hold what he couldn't. I made her the coffee after all. She sat at my table and drank it with both hands wrapped around the cup like it was the first warm thing she'd held in a while, and while she drank I read the page she'd brought. It was a page torn from Tom Cutter's freight ledger, and it wasn't the debt he owed. It was a debt owed to him. I need you to understand how the money moved out here, because the whole matter turns on it. Silas Fenn ran the only bank in 3 counties and the only freight contracts worth having, and he ran them the way a spider runs a web, everything connected, everything sticky, and him sitting fat in the middle feeling the tremble of every string. Men signed notes they couldn't read. Interest doubled between the signing and the reading. And when a man fell behind, Fenn didn't take him to law. Law was slow and public. Fenn took him to a quiet room. But Tom Cutter, God rest his crooked soul, had done one clever thing in his life. He'd hauled freight for Fenn for 11 years, and half of that freight was things Fenn didn't want written in any book that a judge might someday open. And Tom, not trusting exactly but hedging, had written it all down anyway. Dates, weights, destinations, the mine payroll that never reached the mine, the rifles that went north to men who shouldn't have had them, the 3 wagons of mining equipment that came back from the Cutter route lighter than they went out, and heavier in Fenn's vault. Tom Cutter's debt was $1,100. What Tom Cutter knew was worth Fenn's neck. He kept the real ledger somewhere, the girl said. Her name was Ada, I'd learned by then, Ada Cutter. He told me before he died. He said if it ever came to it, I was to find you, because you were the only man in the territory who'd both believe it and not sell it. And has it come to it? She set the cup down. Her hands were steady now. That steadiness scared me more than shaking would have. Fenn's man is coming to the house on the 1st of the month, she said. For the payment. We don't have $11, Mr. Ward, let alone 1,100. So either I find that ledger and I make him afraid of me. She said the word afraid the way another woman might say a prayer, or he takes the house, and my mother dies in the road, and my brother goes to whatever a 9-year-old goes to when there's nobody left. I looked at this girl across my own table, 19 years old with a bruise she wouldn't name and a dead father's sins turned into her sentence, and she wasn't asking me to save her. I realized that slowly, and it shamed me a little. She wasn't asking to be rescued. She was asking where the weapon was buried. You know what happens, I said, if you go up against a man like Fenn and you're wrong about that ledger. Or you're right, and he decides one girl is cheaper to bury than to bargain with. I know exactly what happens. She stood, and there was that stiffness again, quickly hidden. It already happened to my father. I'm just deciding whether it happens to me on my feet or my knees. We rode out the next morning. I told myself I was only guiding her. The Cutter place was 2 days east and the country between was rough, and a man who knew the ridgelines could keep a girl off the wrong ones. That's what I told myself. My log for that night reads Road East with the Cutter girl. Fool's errand. Went anyway. I've never been much for lying to the log, just to myself. The second night out, camped in a dry arroyo with a fire built small the way you build them when you don't want to advertise, Ada told me the rest. How her father hadn't been a good man. How he'd drunk and gambled, and once, when she was small, disappeared for 2 months and came back with money and no story. But how he'd also come to her bedside the last night of his life, sweating out whatever was killing him, and taken her hand, and said the only true thing she thought he'd ever said to her. He said, Ada, I spent my whole life being a small man who did what bigger men told him. She was looking into the fire when she said it, and the light moved on her face. He said, the one thing I saved up wasn't money. Find it, and be bigger than I was. Did he tell you where it was? He tried. Her jaw worked. He was too far gone by then. He said, she closed her eyes, dredging it up, and I could see it cost her to go back into that room. He said, the water knows. That's all. The water knows. Then he was gone. The water knows. I turned it over. Out here water is life and water is memory both. Every man who's ranched dry country knows where every seep and tank and hidden spring sits, and knows too that the maps in his head are worth more than the maps on paper. The water knows. Tom Cutter had hidden the ledger somewhere that only made sense if you knew the land the way a freighter knows his routes. Your father's routes, I said slowly. The freight roads, did he have a water stop he used, someplace private? Ada's eyes came open. And I watched a girl remember something. It's a particular thing to see, the way the whole face changes when a locked door in the memory swings open. She sat up straight, the fire snapping between us, and she said, very quiet, "The Ojo. There's a spring on the old canyon road half a day north of the house. He used to stop there. He took me once when I was little and made me swear never to tell a soul it was there. I thought it was a game." Her voice cracked just slightly on the last word. "It wasn't a game. He was showing me where." We didn't make the Ojo the next day. We made Fenn's men instead. They were waiting on the canyon road where it narrowed between two shoulders of red rock, 3 of them on good horses, and they were waiting like men who'd been told which road a girl would ride. Somebody had talked. Somebody in Canyon Creek had seen Ada Cutter leave, and word travels to a man like Fenn the way water travels downhill, naturally, and toward the low place. The one in front had a soft face and hard eyes, and he called out friendly, which is always the worst sign. "Miss Cutter," he said, tipping his hat, "you're a long way from where your troubles are due." I felt Ada go still beside me, not frightened still, something else, the stillness of a person doing arithmetic. "You're Cole," she said. "You're the one who came to the house." "I am," the soft-faced man smiled. "And I'll be the one comes to collect on the first, so I was surprised to find you riding away from the collecting. Mr. Fenn worries, you understand. He worries you've gone looking for something that isn't yours to look for." There it was, out loud. Fenn knew there was a ledger, and Fenn was afraid of it, and a man, that powerful being that afraid, told me Tom Cutter hadn't been bluffing on his deathbed. The thing was real. The thing was out there, and these 3 had ridden out to make sure it stayed lost. I have played back what happened next 1,000 times, and I still can't tell you I do it different, though God knows I've wanted to. Cole nudged his horse forward. "Why don't you ride back with us, Miss Cutter? We'll get this all settled quiet." "No," Ada said. Just that, no. And in the space after it, I understood that this girl had already decided, somewhere back on the trail, that she was done being collected from. That she'd rather die on the canyon road than ride quiet into one of Sela's Fenn's quiet rooms. And I understood that whatever happened in the next minute, I was in it now, all the way in, because I could no more have sat my horse and watched than I could have cut off my own hand. Cole's soft face lost its softness. His hand moved toward his coat. "And that's where I have to leave it for now. With 3 men on the canyon road, and Ada Cutter's chin up, and my own heart going like a hammer, and the ledger her father died protecting still hidden at a spring called the Ojo, waiting on water that knew what men had tried so hard to drown. What she did next, I'll tell you in part 2. But I'll tell you this to hold you. I have never, before or since, seen anyone do what that girl did on the canyon road. And I've never stopped being ashamed that I doubted, even for a breath, that she would." Cole's hand moved toward his coat. "And Ada Cutter fell off her mule." That's what it looked like. For one heartbeat, that's exactly what it looked like. A frightened girl losing her nerve and her seat both. Cole even laughed, a short bark of a thing, and the 2 men behind him eased in their saddles the way men do when the danger's gone soft. But Ada hadn't fallen. She dropped. There's a difference, and I only learned it that morning. She came off that mule on the far side, putting the animal's body between herself and 3 guns, and she came off with her father's shotgun already sliding out of the blanket roll where she'd carried it the whole trip, and I'd been fool enough to think was bedding. The mule bolted. Ada didn't. She came up on one knee in the red dust with the barrel leveled over the retreating rump of the animal, and she said, loud, flat, without a tremor in it, "The next hand that moves loses the man it belongs to." I had my own pistol out by then. I won't pretend I was quick as she was. I wasn't. But I got it clear, and I put it on the man to Cole's left, the nearest one, and I heard my own voice come out of me steadier than I felt. "That's 2 of you covered," I said. "Cole, you want to do the arithmetic, or you want me to?" Nobody moved. The wind came up the canyon road and turned a little dust devil between us and died. Somewhere a long way off a hawk said something to nobody. I have been in 3 fights in my life where the guns came out, and every one of them was quieter than you'd believe. That terrible held-breath quiet where the whole world narrows down to the small motions of other men's hands. "Girl," Cole said, and his voice had changed. The friendly was gone and something uglier sat where it had been. "You point that thing at me, you'd best be sure. Because if you don't drop me clean, I promise you Fen burns that house down with your mother inside it, and I make you watch before I—" "You came to my house," Ada said. She said it over him, through him, like his threat was just weather. "And I watched the thing I'd seen at my table 3 days back, the arithmetic stillness, turn into something with a spine." "You came to my house," she said again, "and you put your hand on my mother's arm and you told a sick woman what would happen to her son. And you thought," her voice caught not from fear, from a fury so large it barely fit through her throat, "you thought because we were small, because my father was small, that we'd fold. That's what your Mr. Fenn built his whole life on, small people folding. Well, I'm done folding, Cole. I folded my father into the ground 3 weeks ago and I'm all out." "Ada," I said low, "easy." Because I could see where it was going. I could see her finger and I could see Cole's eyes measuring the distance, and I knew that in about 4 seconds one of them was going to make the thing happen that couldn't be unmade. And I did not want to bury this girl at a spring called the Ojo, 40 miles from anyone who'd known her name. And then the thing turned. The way things do out here, not on grand gestures but on small ones, on chance, on a hawk's shadow crossing at the right moment. Ada's mule, the one that had bolted, had run maybe 40 yards up the road and stopped, the way mules do, to reconsider its whole life. And in stopping it had come up broadside against the skyline at the top of the rise, and behind it, cresting the same rise, drawn by the running animal or by God's own timing, were riders. Apache riders, 4 of them, sitting their horses at the top of the canyon road, quiet as the rock itself, watching. I felt Cole's whole calculation come apart. "I need to tell you about the Apache, because if I don't you'll understand this next part wrong, and it matters to me that you understand it right." The band that watched us from that rise were Cheyenne, Warm Springs people, and I knew them, or knew of them, the way you know your dangerous neighbors. Their headman was a man the territory papers called Loco, which was a slander and a lie. He was one of the shrewdest men I ever crossed paths with, and Loco meant only that he'd once refused to die when the army was very sure he should. I'd traded with his people twice. I'd kept my word both times, which in that country made me a curiosity. But here is the thing that mattered on the canyon road. Those 4 riders had no love for Sila's Fen. Because Fenn's freight, the freight Tom Cutter had hauled and written down, the rifles that went north, the payroll that never reached the mine, the mining equipment heavier coming back than going out, some of that was blood money made off the Warm Springs people directly. Contracts to supply an army that was hunting them. Supplies sold to both sides of a war so that Fenn won no matter who died. Tom Cutter's secret ledger didn't just hang Fenn in a white man's court. It named him to the very people his money had helped to break. I didn't know all that yet, sitting my horse on the canyon road. But Cole knew enough. Cole knew that 3 of Fenn's men caught in the open by 4 Cheyenne riders was a different kind of arithmetic entirely, and Cole was, above all his ugliness, a man who could count. He raised his hand slow. "We'll settle this on the first," he said, backing his horse. "At the house, like it was always meant to be." He tried to make it sound like mercy. It sounded like a man leaving a room he'd stopped being the biggest thing in. They rode, all 3 back down the canyon road toward Canyon Creek, and not one of them showed us his back willingly. They went sidelong, watching, the way you leave a fire you're not sure is out. And then it was just Ada, still on one knee in the dust with her father's shotgun, and me with my pistol I hadn't fired, and 4 Warm Springs riders coming down the rise toward us at a walk. Ada didn't lower the gun. "They're not with Fenn," I told her quiet. "Different trouble, maybe no trouble, let me talk." "You know them." "I know they're kind of straight," which was the truest thing I could offer. "Let me talk." The lead writer came down and stopped a respectful distance out. Respectful for both of us, I understood. A distance that said I could close this if I chose, and I'm choosing not to yet. He was younger than Loco, a broad man with an old scar through one eyebrow and eyes that missed nothing. He looked at me a long moment. Then he looked at Ada, at the shotgun, at the way she held it, and something moved at the corner of his mouth that on a less careful man might have been the beginning of respect. He spoke to me in Spanish, which was the trade tongue between us. He asked if the three who'd run were Fenn's dogs. I said they were. He asked what a girl was doing on the canyon road, with Fenn's dogs at her throat. And I looked at Ada, still braced, still fierce, not understanding a word but understanding everything, and I made a choice that I've never regretted and never entirely stopped weighing. I told him the truth. I told him about Tom Cutter, about the debt made of blood and the ledger made of proof, and the spring called the Ojo where a dead man had hidden the one thing that could unmake Sela's Fen. I told him because I'd traded with these people twice and kept my word, and because I'd rather be a man who told the truth to the wrong person than a man who lied to the right one. And because, God help me, I had a notion, forming even as I spoke, of what that ledger might be worth to men Fenn had also robbed. The writer was quiet a long time when I'd finished. Then he said in Spanish, a thing I've carried 20 years, "Your dead man wrote our dead down in his book. Maybe he did not mean it as a kindness, but the dead do not ask what was meant, only what is done." He turned his horse, and before he rode he said one thing more, and this time he said it looking at Ada, though she couldn't understand him and I'd have to tell her later. "The spring you look for, we will not be there, but we will be near. When you have your dead man's book, the road to Canyon Creek is long and Fenn's dogs will be on it. A girl and an old man should not ride it alone." Then they were gone up the rise like they'd been a thing I'd dreamed, and Ada finally, slowly, lowered the shotgun and looked at me with her face full of questions and said, "What in God's name just happened?" "I think," I said, "we just got an escort." We reached the Ojo in the last light. It was a small thing, the spring, a seep in a cleft of rock where a cottonwood grew improbable and green out of the dry country, and a stone tank some old Spaniard had built 100 years before to catch what the rock gave up. The water was cold and clean and it moved just enough to whisper, "The water knows." I understood, standing there, why a hiding man's mind would go to it. It was the one place on his whole route that felt like a secret God was keeping. Ada didn't waste light on wonder. She was down off her borrowed horse and into the cleft, running her hands over the stone of the tank, and I could see her fighting the same fear I was fighting. That the water nose had been a dying man's fever babble after all, that we'd come all this way to a pretty spring and an empty answer. It was the cottonwood. She found it because she stopped looking with her eyes and started looking with her memory, crouched down small the way a child would be small, seeing the place from the height she'd seen it at when her father brought her here and made her swear. And from down there, small, she saw what a grown searcher would miss. A flat stone at the cottonwood's root, set deliberate, greened over but square in a way nature doesn't bother to be. She lifted it. Her hands were shaking now, the fear finally getting its say, now that the answer was close. Under the stone was an oilcloth bundle, and under the oilcloth was a tin box gone dark with damp, and inside the box, wrapped again in oilcloth against the wet, was a ledger. Her father's real ledger. 11 years of Sela's Fenn's sins in a dead freighter's careful hand. Ada sat down in the dirt at the foot of the cottonwood with the book in her lap, and she didn't open it. She just held it. And then, this girl who'd stayed dry-eyed through her father's grave and Cole's threats and 3 guns on the canyon road. She put her face down against the cover of that book, and she cried like the world was ending. I turned away and let her. Some grief is a thing you owe a person privacy for. In my log that night I wrote only, she found it, she wept. I have not seen the like. I did my feeling later the way I always do. I'm doing some of it now. Here is where I could tell you it went clean. It didn't go clean. Nothing built by a man like Fenn comes down clean, and I'd be lying to you, and I don't lie to the log, if I let you think one ledger and 4 Apache riders undid 11 years of a spider's web in an afternoon. We rode into Canyon Creek on the 1st of the month, which was the day Cole was to come collect at the Cutter house. But we didn't go to the house. Ada's plan, and it was hers, I want that understood, I only kept her off the wrong ridgelands, was to go where Fenn couldn't have a quiet room. She went to the church. It was a Sunday, the 1st of the month falling so, and half the county was packed into the little adobe church at the center of Canyon Creek, and Silas Fenn sat in the front pew the way rich men do, in the seat that says I paid for the roof. And Ada Cutter walked up the center aisle of that church in the middle of the sermon with her dead father's ledger in her 2 hands, and she stopped at the front, and she turned around to face the whole county, and she started to read. She read the mine payroll that never reached the mine. Men in that church had gone hungry that winter, and here was the reason, in dates and dollars. She read the rifles that went north to men who used them on other men, whose widows sat 3 pews back. She read the mining equipment, heavier coming back than going out, and what it had really been and whose vault it filled. She read the names. God, she read the names. And I stood at the back of that church and watched a whole county's worth of small folded people slowly understand that the thing that had broken them all separately had been one thing all along, sitting in the front pew in a good coat. Fenn came up out of his seat white with fury and called her a liar and a thief and the daughter of a thief. And for one bad moment I thought the county might believe him, because that's the habit of small people, to believe the big voice. But then a man stood up in the middle pews, a freighter, one of Tom Cutter's old partners, a man named Bill Reese who I'd have called a coward on any other day. And Reese said into the ringing quiet, "She's not lying. I drove one of those loads. I've been sick with it 11 years. And he sat back down and put his face in his hands. And then another stood, and another. That's the thing about a spider's web. Every man caught in it thinks he's alone in the strands. Show them the whole web at once. Show them they were never alone, only isolated. And the very thing that held them becomes the thing that hangs the spider. Fenn ran. Of course he ran. Men like that always have a horse saddled and a bag packed, because underneath the good coat they've always known. He rode north out of Canyon Creek at a gallop with the county's fury behind him, and no law willing to stop him, because he'd owned the law, and the law was the last to understand it didn't belong to him anymore. The road north out of Canyon Creek is long. And Fenn's dogs were not on it, but 4 Chihin riders were. I won't tell you what happened on the North Road, partly because I wasn't there and I don't put things in my log that I didn't see, and partly because some justice isn't mine to narrate. I'll tell you only that Silas Fenn never reached wherever he thought he was riding, and that the Warm Springs people collected, in their own way and their own coin, a debt that had been owed to their dead a long time. The dead do not ask what was meant, only what is done. Make of that what you need to. I've made my peace with it. It took some years. Ada Cutter kept the house. More than the house, the county, once it understood what Fenn had taken, found it had a great deal to give back, and gave some of it to the girl who'd stood up in the church. Her mother lived 2 more years, which is 2 more than she'd have had. Her brother grew up in that house and grew up straight, and last I heard was freighting the Canyon Road himself, honest loads, in a wagon with his grandfather's name painted on the side, which, when you know what the grandfather was, is either a strange thing to be proud of or exactly the right thing, and I've decided it's the right thing. Tom Cutter spent his whole life being a small man who did what bigger men told him, and the one thing he saved wasn't money. And his granddaughter's brother paints his name on a wagon and hauls honest freight down the road his sins once ran. And if that isn't a man being made bigger after his death than he ever was in life, I don't know what to call it. I saw Ada once more, years on. She was grown by then, married, a hardness in her that had settled into something more like strength than like grief. We didn't say much. People who have stood together on a canyon road don't need to. But at the end, before I rode off, she asked me a thing I've never fully answered, not to her and not to my log. She said, "Do you think he knew, my father, when he wrote it all down, do you think he knew I'd be the one to use it?" And I looked at her, this woman who'd been a girl falling off a mule that wasn't falling. And I thought about a dying man in a fever saying the water knows. And I thought about how the debt was written in his name and paid in hers. And I opened my mouth to give her something comforting. I didn't in the end. Some things you trust a person to carry without you setting it down neat for them. She knew her father better than I did. She'd know the answer better than I could give it. So I just tipped my hat, the small thing, the only thing you have to give sometimes. And I rode east toward my cattle and my bad knee and my log, and I left her sitting a horse in the road with the question still open in her hands. The way her father had once left a book in the dark, trusting the water to know.